Ka mai. Well, tēnei timahi kia koutou katoa. Nau mai haere mai ki tēnei hui. Ki ngā turu kei te taha, ngā tangata ki reira, tēnā koutou. Ki ngā tangata e mā takitaki ana ki runga i tō epurangi, tēnei te mihi kia koutou. Me tīmata koutou i te karakia o te rā, whakataka. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tau. E hi aki ana te ātakura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, ti hei mauri ora. Cease the winds from the west, cease the winds from the south, let the breeze blow over the land, let the breeze blow over the ocean. Let the red-tipped dawn come with a sharpened ear, a touch of frost, a promise of a glorious day. Tēnā koutou.
Thank you very much, anyway. And I'd like to welcome, Paul Bailey, looking very fine back there. And anybody who is also viewing us, I hope, not we don't entertain you, but I hope that you are happy with what you see. Do you have any apologies? We don't? No apologies? Notices? Any notices? No notices. Any new conflict of interest declarations other than you have put down? There are none. Thank you very much. Confirmation of the minutes of the 29th of January. Do we have...
Happy to move.
Happy to move. Thank you. Mover and a seconder. All those in favour? Aye. Those minutes are accepted. Follow-ups on those minutes. Do we have any follow-ups that people want to discuss?
So, Chair, I think they're either on upcoming agenda items or have been dealt with. There has already been some discussion offline about wider Gisborne rail matters. I think everything else there should be self-explanatory.
Can the name change, I just see that's put out to 10th of June, is there any reason that's about so far, or can that be brought forward in the area?
Look, the primary reason that the date was set out there is it's an unplanned piece of work, and therefore staff need to weave it into their existing work programs and the availability for it. It could be brought forward if we took perhaps a lighter touch approach to the analysis of it. I take the point that you've made directly to me, Councillor, in terms of the potential impact on the business of this unplanned piece of work. So perhaps take some guidance from Council today about the depth of analysis that you're looking for this piece of work.
I think that's a good idea. Thoughts?
Yep, I've made some suggestions to you as definitely a lighter touch, and I'll be quite blunt about it. Do a Google search with other organisations what it roughly cost. To me, that would suffice, because I know where this situation lies. I'm getting so much feedback from the community, negative about it, and I get it. I get it where they're coming from. So that's my view on it.
Before we come to you, Councillor, please stay there.
Yeah,
Will?
I'll just back up Councillor Van Beek's comments, is that the amount of feedback I've had has been overwhelming more than anything, perhaps apart from the dry environment that's unfolding before us right now. But yeah, from my point of view, I'd just like to see it come up as soon as we can and deal with it, and hopefully deal with it in a way that gets it off the agenda going forward.
Martin?
Yeah, I expressed reservations about it when the motion was tabled. I regret voting for even the paper to be presented. I would actually like to go the other way and see this deferred until 2022 and get on with the business of this council. So I support Councillor Van Beek's back of the envelope would do me.
Yep, I'd have to say I'd support every comment here, and that we have bigger problems to solve, and our community have told us so. And I actually believe in what our communities are sharing with us. So I'd actually like us to bring it forward and use as less resource as possible, and get this over and done with. Thank you.
Any other comment before I go to Councillor Barker?
Oh, I'm not going to die on a ditch over this. I thought it was a good idea. People said, what does the regional council do? I thought, well, let's tell people what we do in our name. I thought it was a pretty simple thing. I didn't see it as a big, huge issue in terms of complexity or something. I thought a back of the envelope would have been pretty quick. People get the scope of it. I've already asked for the logo to be changed, done on with an electronic hand, pick up a word and put another one in. It looks pretty good to me. I mean, we could leave it at that, cost next to nothing, but people seem to think this is a big issue. I didn't see it as a big issue at all, really, in terms of cost.
So, Chair, that gives me a feel for the...
Craig, you got a quick comment?
Sorry.
I was just going to pick up on that, and look, I think we just we've got a lot of things on our plate right now, but with Mother Nature in particular. So let's just whatever the correct wording is, let's just kill any consideration of that item until such time as it may be further raised again.
That's quite different from just a quick run over and come back, what that cost would be.
I know.
So is there a feeling we just kill this now?
Can't do that by motion.
No, that was
Okay.
There's a process
Whatever.
for having motions. There's a notice of motion.
There is, and so we do have an instruction. The one thing that I could get some guidance on, in addition to the question of the depth of analysis, and I think we've got a feel for that.
You've got that.
Is the timing. Would council be comfortable for this coming direct to a council meeting as opposed to going to a corporate and strategic committee meeting? Because that is what largely drives that timetable. I don't think we're in a position to bring it to the very next corporate and strategic committee meeting, so the one after that's June. So if we were able to bring it directly to council with your agreement, then that would enable us to bring that forward.
Fine with me.
Yep, I'm agreeable.
Okay. Thank you.
Are there any more minor items? Any follow-ups? If there's not, we'll move to minor items, not on the agenda. I have one, Chair's Workshop. Are there any others?
Yeah, Drought Committee.
Drought Committee? Any others? Well, do you want a response to that as a minor item? Because generally minor items we don't get a response. You just want to talk to the Drought Committee. Okay. We'll move to item 6, which is significant activities through March. And you've all got the extensive paper. Now we have Nick has joined us. Where is he? There he is. Both you guys, do you want to come up here just in case you've got questions? Okay. I think rather than we go through this, are there any particular, Martin?
just one, a couple actually. Firstly, there's a reference to future actions to address the wastewater discharges and a report on those future actions provided to the court in a thumbnail sketch terms. Good morning. What are those future actions that are being proposed for the sewage treatment plant at Waipukaro?
A number of things were put forward by Central Hawke's Bay. One is to take the Atani waste discharge and bring it up to Waipawa. Waipawa to be upgraded. The wetlands treatment systems that are on both Waipawa and Waipukaro will be removed, so the floating wetland part of their treatment systems. Waipawa upgraded as basically the principal treatment plant. Otani brought to it possibilities that Waipukaro would also be taken across to Waipawa and all the treatment occur at Waipawa and then discharged, and they're looking at a system of discharge to land
sort of adjacent to the river, but it would go through a gravel, go through treatment, and it would be discharged to sort of the gravel margins, and probably would find its way back to the in the Walker Road area back to the Waipawa River. Some of those things require resource consent before they could actually occur, and they require finance, and the finance was a sort of a question that we had outstanding in our discussions with them to sort of, they were demonstrating that it was going to be difficult to actually fund the full package, and they were advising they were going to be looking at a variety of sources, including regional council and central government, to contribute towards some of the cost of what was proposed.
I could have there's several follow-up questions I could make to that, but I probably don't need to take the time. And the backdrop to this is an enforcement action against the council for breach of the existing consent, right?
Yes, it is, on Waipawa, yeah.
Councillor, look, I'd make the observation, this is one of these examples where you've got an awkwardness in terms of an Environment Court process and a Resource Management Act process that requires certain investments to be made, but you've also got a Local Government Act process that needs to allocate and fund those resources, and the two don't necessarily come together in the sequence you might like.
Thank you.
Neil.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just in terms of this paper, significant activities through March, is this retrospective or prospective?
Probably what I'm reporting is sort of a running conversation. I'll try and update some of the bigger consents that we're processing, but generally they take quite a period of time, and not a lot has necessarily changed from.
But my question is, does this report, are you reporting on activities up till today, or are you telling us that these are the activities we're going to undertake in March?
It's a mix, really.
So it's sort of it's current
State.
work.
Okay, that's fine. Can I take you to the Southern Catchment, item 5? Actions proposed now require further resource consents for the wastewater discharge consents. Can you see that?
Mm-hmm.
Page 11.
11.
I take you to item 5. The reference there, staff have met with CHB District Council to discuss implementation of the agreed strategies and funding, more detailed program of works to be provided. You see that? Tell me, have you met with, when have you met with the District Council staff? Have there been multiple meetings?
Week before last, we met with
So for this purposes of the report, are we talking a number of meetings progressively, say, over the last 2 or 3 months? Is that right?
Yeah, we've been meeting. There's actually a working group which HBRC was attending over the last couple of years as they consulted with the community, included us in that discussion. That sort of led to the response to the Environment Court, which was about October last year.
So this is a standard working, or a working group of the central.
Yes, this is us trying to meet and see that there's momentum in terms of what they said they were going to do to the Environment Court.
So that's a formally constructed meeting. It's got an agenda, etc. All of those.
No, this is informal. So this is.
Can I just ask about the funding aspects? Are you able to say that the resources applied by the council, the district council, are tracking according to their long-term plan? Or do we have much knowledge of their resource allocation for this purpose?
They have documented costs of the proposals and estimated what they can fund through basically their sources of revenue. I don't know that they're fully documented in their LTP, so this is in discussion with us, and they've identified shortfalls.
So they do have a shortfall, so they cannot, under their current LTP funding track, fund all of the works required.
That's really my question.
Yes, and so they will have to bring that through their next long-term plan, although as I understand it, there are debt ceiling issues for the CHBDC, and so there may actually be statutory limitations to their ability to fund everything that's required here.
Okay. I wonder if we can have an action point for next time in terms of reporting back, a very brief summation of the resourcing implications for the council in delivering their wastewater strategy. Is that possible?
For the District Council?
District Council, yeah. So our assessment of their plans.
Thank you. Through the Chair, that was very much part of the conversation in terms of what the shortfalls are, what the options were, and then we're still going through that process, but I think that we'll be able to get a better indication from the council in terms of where exactly what and what options they were looking at.
And finally, if I could, are we looking to make a submission to their annual plan?
I don't believe they're consulting on their annual plan.
They're not going out to consultation.
No, not for their annual plan.
Can we nevertheless comment? Is there scope?
Not formally, but obviously we can convey a view to them any time. The long-term plan will be the next opportunity to do that. Yeah. So they will be consulting next year on their long-term plan, and we can certainly submit, and we would expect to do so.
The second question I had related to the consent on hold for the Ruataniwha Tranche 2. Can you just tell me a little bit about that? Who's the applicant? Who are the applicants? Precisely what is the consent for? Where is it at? What's going on there?
Tranche 2 is the provision that was made through the plan change for 15 million cubic metres of water to be able to be taken from groundwater over and above what was allocated and basically is taken to date.
I understand that much.
There's, I think, 8 applicants for the water that makes up that 15 million. I can't, off the top of my head, name applicants. They've been lodged. We've asked for more information around particularly the environmental effects of taking that groundwater sort of in the immediate vicinity of the points of take, and the offsetting requirements that are sitting within the plan. So to take that water, there's times when there's an understanding that it's still having an impact on surface water. There's a need for them to offset the effect of taking that, particularly at periods of low flow. And so the work is being done by their consultants. I think it's Aqualink, to document and understand and give us explanation of what they see as the way to offset. So we're still waiting to receive that back.
And I take it at that point when the information's in, a decision would be made around notification?
Yes. Yep.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Craig?
A couple of questions. Just Clive River dredging. You have an evaluation done system with the market general. I've just had a lot of comment in and around that in the public. I think we all kind of struggle to understand a wee bit why everyone knows it needs to be dredged and why it's not being dredged. Can you add anything more to what you've got there in 11? And does that mean that, I presume, Property Group is assisting with the market valuation means you're looking to purchase some land to put the dredged materials on or something?
Right.
So what is if that, roughly what are the kind of the parameters you're talking about here?
Sure. So look, I can answer that in Chris Dolly's absence today. The previous council took a decision last year to not dredge the Clive River in the manner it was done in the 2 previous occasions that we've done that, which is disposing of all of the dredged spoil at the river mouth to flow out to sea. They decided on environmental and cultural grounds that it should be disposed of to land. That requires us to have a relatively significant amount of land area available for the dredged spoil. We're talking about 50,000 cubic metres, so it's a very large area. At the moment, and that land needs to be proximal to the river dredging site because the cartage costs are uneconomic. So we've only got a couple of possibilities in terms of landowners with whom we can put the sediment. The sediment does have some benefit in terms of land use, in terms of it having some sort of growing and nutrient availability, but it does involve a period in which the land will lie fallow and therefore not be economically used. So we have a choice as to whether or not we lease land for a period and compensate a landowner for the loss of economic use for a couple of years, or whether we acquire the land ourselves. And that will also go to willing buyer status and willing seller status as well. So the work that's being done at the moment is to really understand the land value in terms of both loss of income if we go down the lease route or the purchase route. And that's to support the conversations with the landowners right now. So we're trying to secure that land, and certainly our preference has been from a general management point of view is to acquire the land and hold the land so that we have a long-term secure arrangement around dredging into the future. And that may be land which is adjacent to the current Waitangi Park and helps us to continue to complement that area. So
without going through any commercial discussions you might be having, then again, next month's report, perhaps, if you're able to, just give us an idea of the ballpark of what roughly the guesstimate, at least perhaps at that stage, is to bring the Clive River and river mouth back to a space and place where it can be used as most of the public expect it to be able to use in a state with respect to cultural, etc., roughly what that might be costing, because it's been quite some time for it not to be able to be used properly. Mr. Chair, the second point is there's two actually, just the soil conservation nursery expansion. I know might that sound a wee bit boring, but you're expanding that, that's great. Does that stop the need or change the makeup of another project you've got going regarding the use of land in and around the prison?
So they are directly related. One of the issues we've got is that we need those poplar poles now, and the prison nursery proposition has taken longer for the parties to make progress on than we had hoped, and we'll still have an establishment period even if that does progress. And in the short to medium term, we're going to need we need poplar poles being cultivated this coming winter. So there is some urgency. So they're not mutually exclusive, and we have the two programs in mind in terms of how they work together. But in the very short term, we have land available to us for expanding our nursery this coming winter, and so we're getting on with doing that.
And the prison proposal, that's just going through its normal consultation with the community process, I guess, is it?
What's occurring at the moment is that there is a three-way body of work being done between corrections, ourselves, and Ngāti Kahungunu Iwi Incorporated around effectively a business case for investment by central government. And there are some uncertainties about the nature of the investment in terms of scale, species, all those sorts of things that are being worked through.
That evaluation will also consult locally with other businesses or other nurseries or something, I guess, would it? So
what we are doing is we have the CEO of the Plant Producers Association that represents all the nurseries visiting in a couple of weeks, and we are using his visit as an opportunity to engage with the local nursery providers about this project. So they are being consulted. In terms of wider public consultation, that will occur in relation to any significant council expenditure. Obviously, if we're going to invest any money in the space, under the current thinking, this wouldn't come as a cost to the regional council. It would be simply a case of us being a customer, if you like, of the prison nursery.
Thanks. And the other one is they're kind of combined. Think possums, so 35, 36, 37. And then later on, we've got a bit of an update on this tuberculosis outbreak, points 46 through 51, and there was another point there. Just and thanks very much for the updates. Just the engagement, and is there any more information you can share with us in and around the possum control areas in and around that the regional council has responsibility for, and is there anything we need to be looking out for, or you're comfortable that everything's okay and your engagement with Osprey, I think you say there your plan control will impact on Hawke's Bay's possum control program anyway. Where's that all going? Because I'm sure everyone's working hard at it, but this has come from kind of nowhere, and that's quite a serious issue if in fact it got out of hand. And I know you do say there it's not uncommon, which is true.
Yes.
But it, regardless if it's uncommon or not, it needs to be dealt with big time.
Agreed. So look, this is a serious issue that we are concerned about there. There will be a report coming to the next Environment Committee, but in terms of the information about our current possum control areas and the performance of those, I think we could probably provide some information as a follow-up to the next council meeting, which will come sooner than the next Environment Committee meeting, from memory of dates. So happy to provide that to you. In relation to the situation with the TB outbreak, what has been identified there is that it's possible that the lack of possum control in plantation forestry is a contributing factor to what's happened here. And under our regional pest management plan, there's no program or requirement for possum control within plantation forests except for an owner responsibility. And so that is arguably a gap in the current regional pest management strategy. So arising from this situation and in discussion with Osprey is the possibility that we do need to make some changes to the regional pest management plan to target those areas, and that's some advice that we'll bring forward to you. Thank you.
It's quite a big issue in the paper this morning.
No, I honestly haven't even seen that, but it's been a bubbling issue for quite some time, and the public expect us to be on top.
Charlie, I miss you.
Yeah, and just subsequent to that, I went to a public meeting, and definitely the farmers that were there, instead of actually talking about water, actually this became a real issue for them.
Yes.
And they acknowledged that we as a council had done a fantastic job up to the time when Osprey took over. So here we are, a council, and we actually have got no control. They've dropped the ball. You know, that's fairly clear, and they actually had some more colourful words to that effect. How can we as a council make sure that an organisation like Osprey actually does its due diligence and actually does what they need to do? You know, because they've, in the farmers' words, they've wrecked the good work that we as a council have done.
Really, they said that?
Yeah.
There's one person to blame.
Yeah, no, I was thinking, no, don't go there.
I don't want to make any comment about Osprey's performance because I'm not in a position to make judgments on that. But what I do think is an opportunity is for an engagement with Osprey and Council. So we are planning to have a detailed conversation with you at the next Environment Committee about our biosecurity performance, and I just wonder whether the opportunity is that we get senior management or even governance from Osprey into Council and have a conversation with them about the working relationship, their responsibilities, our responsibilities, and how that could work better. So I'm happy to take that up.
Especially if the farmers think they've dropped the ball.
Yeah, I think we still take like a couple of dollars off everyone for possum control, but it is still questioning what exactly are we doing with that money. Yeah, so cool. It's good to see that we're going to help doing a bit of urban control as well with wireless, and happy with that.
Yeah, so you know the coverage that we've got in terms of our PCAs, but also where the general rate funded expenditure is going in this space is what we'll cover also in the briefing. So you get a sense of what it is that we're doing on possums and what we're not.
Well, I'd be really happy for them to come to our next meeting, provided they come along with, firstly, a description of the problem and how it arose, but more importantly, some ideas about how we make a plan, go forward and make it work better. I mean, I don't want to sit there and just have a discussion about problem definition, but I want, under notice, people to come along and say, what can we do to make this better?
Neil?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Can I just take you to, this is page 14, item 39, Waiora District Council wastewater discharge. The question is similar to Central Hawke's Bay. I'm assuming that meetings have taken place with the Waiora District Council on wastewater discharge?
In terms of those pre-hearings, one is occurring on Friday.
So any meetings have been in specific to the hearings, is that correct?
Well, to the consent application, I think.
So there's no broader discussion with them about their plans and processes?
So I can answer that there is a broader conversation with the Wairoa District Council as with all of the TAs in the region about Three Waters. So the review we're doing at the moment is looking at the condition of those, the future asset expenditure.
Okay.
So that conversation is happening
Sure.
continuously at the moment.
I'm just thinking, going back to Central Hawke's Bay, where there was discussion about implementation of plans, resourcing, detailed program of works. Do we have the similar engagement and understanding of their wastewater issues in Wairoa as we do in Central Hawke's Bay?
I think the short answer is yes. Where this gets interesting, and it's similar to the situation in Central Hawke's Bay, is that they have budget plans for a particular set of solutions which are being proposed here through the resource consent process. It's not clear at this point whether those proposals will survive the consent process in their current form, or for how much longer those arrangements will be consented for, which is to say that there's every possibility, like with CHB, that they come out of the consenting process with a greater level of capital expenditure than they currently anticipate, and that will then have to be worked through the Local Government Act processes.
Sure. The follow-on question then is, do we believe there's sufficient resources being applied by Wairoa District Council to meet overall wastewater requirements?
That's very much part of the conversation we're having on Friday. So the first pre-hearing will really ask those questions.
Yeah, what I'm suggesting is that that's specific to a hearing. What I'm asking is, overall...
This is, so Councillor, I understand the question, and it's a difficult thing to put to our consents team. They have a quasi-judicial process whereby they have to receive an application, they have to treat it on its merits, and it has to go through a whole process of...
I get that, but what I'm saying is...
So for them to make what I would say possibly is a subjective evaluation of the adequacy of their plans is not really for the consents team.
But they've made a comment in Central Hawke's Bay to that effect.
Well, because it's been through a judicial process which is now complete, which has defined what it is they have to do.
That's fine. My next, sorry, Mr. Chair, the next follow-up question is central catchments. Napier City Council, Hastings District Council, and my question's essentially ditto. Have we got an understanding? Are we meeting? Have we got an understanding of what they're doing? Do we know what their resources are like? Are they likely to meet that requirements to effect their plans?
Through the chair, yes, we are meeting with Napier City Council. They have certain studies that are undertaken by the Commission Becker to look at some of the studies. They're still very much in that process with them, and they haven't actually presented those back to their council at present, but so we're awaiting more information in terms of options, in terms of improvements as well. So it's very much in process as well as we speak.
So with respect to the wastewater situation in Napier, they have a current consent and they have some compliance issues with that consent, which Council's been briefed on previously, and they're working through with both their engineering consultants and their council the resolution of those. In terms of the longer term performance and any significant upgrade of that will have to come through both the regional rules and the reconsenting of those assets. And I think they have provisionally a view that there is upgrades required, and part of that is what's feeding into the Three Waters review.
Okay, thanks, Neil. I think Neil's line of questioning is very good, because he's really saying we've got all these actions going on and all this talk going on. Do our councils have the intention and the resource to back the intention to fix some of the legacy issues? That's basically what you're saying, isn't it?
And Chair, if I may, that is a key question which is being asked of the Three Waters review, which is publicly announced with the support of $1.5 million of central government funding. So there's detailed analysis going into all that right now.
Yes.
Keep my comments to later.
Okay. I just have one, just an update. It is item 28. It shouldn't be called Tāngata Park. It's actually the track, the cycle track. Just to say that I attended a meeting at the Whenua on Friday, and where it was unanimously agreed that the consultation had been completed and that the track would proceed. So just to make a statement about
Well
that.
done. Great news.
Chair, I think we'd like to use the term trail on this occasion so that
Oh, trail.
nobody's confused between tracks and
Don't use
trails.
the word
on
track
that.
anymore.
Cycle trail. Yeah, no, we get the right cycle trail. So that's all done. It's been a little bit of a journey, but it's done. So, is there anything else, or can we move on? Do we have a mover? We're just receiving and
Can I just make one comment, please?
Certainly.
It's only a comment, not a question. On point 60, I would like to just congratulate the compliance team for being brave and seeing that there actually was an uplift in the flow of the Ngāraroa, and that they could see that those who are reliant on that water for irrigation were really under a lot of pressure, and they actually have temporarily lifted the ban on the Ngāraroa, which will really help with rootstock survival. So we've advised our members, our irrigators, that they should be very diligent with that water and use it only for where it is really needed, and at any time that the ban could be lifted. And the responses back have just been fantastic. So we now see Hawkesbury Regional Council with heart that actually is willing to actually help those who are in need. So that's really good, and so I would like you to pass that on to staff.
Thank you, Jeff. I'm pleased that we've gained heart since you've joined us. Okay, we have a recommendation. We have a mover. Was it Craig, seconder, Neil? All those in favour of receiving and noting this report?
Neil wants to debate.
Oh, you want to?
I want to talk to us. Yeah.
You want to talk to it?
Yep.
Fine. Well, this is new. Yes. Okay, off you
Well,
go.
Mr. Chair, I just want to make this comment to staff on this paper. What it tells me is significant activities, and there are milestones associated with those. When I read around issues around, in the example around wastewater, I'm assuming there is a plan which has milestones and which we're working to. What I'm not seeing is some specifics around that, and I'm not seeing comprehensive reporting. In other words, significant, I would have thought, was Napier City Council's wastewater and Hastings District as well, and I think they should be in the report, so that we're getting line of sight, and it is a significant activity going on. I know there's lots going on, but this report doesn't tell me that it's going on, so that's one comment on that. The other aspect that I'm really wanting to pursue, and I know the Chief Executive has deferred to the Three Waters process, we have agreed on a bilateral process as well. And I believe we ought to be able to identify individual bilateral planning around wastewater. Now that has a plan, and then we're reporting on activities around the plan. So I'm really wanting to see the next report reflect that actual activity. And I like the reference, particularly in regard to Central Hawke's Bay, to the issues of agreed strategies, funding, detailed program of works, and all of those activities. So if we could report against your plan, that would be really appreciated.
Thank you, Craig. Do you wish to speak?
No, I just actually endorse what Councillor Keating's, just the points he made, very well made, I think, and that excellent reports, etc., coming at us, but we need something to test them against, be it traffic lights or something, on the way through, whatever those milestones or KPIs are.
Anyone else wish to speak? Okay, we have a mover and a seconder. All those in favour of receiving the report? Aye.
All right.
Chair, just before we move on, we've got Thomas Wilding, who's the team leader of our freshwater science team here, and we did think, just off the back of the significant activity report, we'd give a quick presentation on the state of fresh water in the region. So with your indulgence, Chair, we asked Thomas to come and give us a... You ready now, Thomas? You weren't expecting anybody else?
Thanks, Nick and Malcolm. Thank you very much for being all over your subject and take the questions.
Excuse me while I put a...
That's not that side.
under the radar. Thank you.
James, can you introduce us? Yep.
So I was going to introduce you, Thomas, but it's already up there, so it's relatively self-explanatory. But Thomas is the team leader of our freshwater hydrology and hydrogeology team. And Thomas, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add about your context. You've been with us for a number of years.
And first time I've presented to this council, so
you've been recently appointed team leader, so
that's right.
Yep.
Yes. Yep. And often Kathleen would give these talks, so I'll try and cover while she's away some of the climate and forecasting. Bear with me if I'm scratching my head. So an update on the climate, how dry it is. Firstly, this is the rainfall from just last weekend. We had a bit of rain, and this just gives us a little bit of an overview with, some decent amounts of rain up here. Not a lot down through here, up in the ranges, 4 millimetres, that's pretty small. But anyway, we did get some parts of the region got a good dose. February rainfall, February isn't over yet, so I can't give you how February stacks up, so I've just tried to give us as a proportion of the 3 weeks of February that we've got already. Generally though, pretty small, 10-15% of the rainfall in the ranges, more rain to the north. So the places that got the rain on the weekends, that's showing up there a bit and brought them into something getting closer to average rainfall. So river flows. This plot, we're looking at the Tukituki River. We measure the flow at Red Bridge between. That one out of the way too. There you go.
The water level's got down below the top of the chairs.
He's not very tall. He's lower the chairs.
So Red Bridge, what we've done here is plot this black line as the flow this year. And as a reference, 2013 was a particularly dry year. And then the blue line is last year, which was not particularly dry. So you can see the Tukituki River is tracking low, tracking below 2013 even. 2013 wasn't the driest year ever in the Tuki, but it's a good reference.
Just before we go up that graph, where is we've got a plan change 6 requires us to be at 70 cubics. Where is that on that line?
So
here. That's there.
So we dropped below the new minimum flow, which I think is 3,400 litres per second. You can see it's really sort of flattened off at that point.
Was that because we put people on ban? Did that flatten off?
People did go on ban at that point.
Did that have an effect?
So that's where the minimum flow come in. So that's what, since then, it seems to have flattened off, is what he's saying.
Yeah. Yeah, and often, people talk about, oh, I can see a change when people go on ban, and often I can't see it. But I do see it flattening off at that point.
The next, we've got a step up in the minimum flow coming. Where is that on your line? 2 years out.
So that goes up another 25%, so goes to 4,200, I think, from memory.
Yeah.
So yeah, we would have been on ban probably early January, I think, at that point.
You just put your finger on it?
So I'm not sure if that dropped down below the what will be the next minimum flow.
Yeah,
but over here it would have been down around here, so it would have been.
Wherever it touches the red line there, so that would be where we've turned the water off at that point.
Roughly, yeah, would have been late January.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
So yeah, I just added some more data to this plot this morning. This is the Ngātaroro. Same plot, again, black line is this year. Red line is flow in 2013, and blue line is last year. And the cutoff is 2,400 litres a second for the Ngātaroro. And just last night, just yesterday, we got I wouldn't call it a flood, I wouldn't call it a fresh, barely a blip, but it's brought the river just above, I think about 2,800 litres a second. They gauged that yesterday.
Is that due to rain in the headwaters?
I'm assuming the rain on the weekends has come through. That's a very long time for it to travel, but when it's slow flow, it takes a longer time for rain to come through. But that smaller blip, I don't know. It would only be a guess on my part.
Well, any rise in the river in the middle of summer's got, and no rain there, no rain on Twyford, well, 5 mils at my place. So any blip has got to be a result of something. It's got to be. What was the rain? I didn't quite notice. Did you know?
4 mil on the
No,
previous
in
one.
the headwaters though.
Yeah, in the headwaters there.
We did get
Some at Ngāmatea there.
so we did get some up to 14.
What about that 32? Is that a 32 up the top there?
That might be Mohaka.
Yeah, I think that's in the Mohaka.
Oh, that's the Mohaka. Yeah, get your water.
But also the headwaters of the Ngātaroro is on the other side of the divide, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
So we would have
Ngāmatea and Timahanga are right up.
Although that 14 is there, I think that is on the other side of that, is up at Ngāmatea from memory. So, look, I think probably the obvious explanation is a really big catchment, so a relatively small amount of rain has made a material difference.
Yeah.
Because when you go back to the blip, so if it goes just over the minimum flow, you've got on the thing that you say ban off today, so we turn the ban off, people go back on to using the irrigators.
Yep.
And see, it's just got a little bit of a turn down there, so could we be looking at the ban going back on the next day?
Yep. Yeah, that's my opinion, definitely will be.
Yes.
Yeah. But even if we wouldn't have irrigated, it goes so quickly. And we learned that fairly quickly by not having trees in that whole catchment. It used to take 4 or 5 days before the water finally would arrive, and then it would slowly come and keep on coming. Now it actually just rain in the headwaters. It comes in a flash almost the same day. You can see it, the discolouring of the water. If it's no rain on Heretaronga Plains, but it's in the headwaters, you see discolouring of the water, and within no time it's gone again. And it's a matter of, once again, not having trees in the landscape. And so we can't actually hold
Not
the
having
water.
trees in the headwaters.
Headwaters,
especially.
yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Which was Gordon Pucker's theory.
And actually, I should say, I wouldn't normally put in a data point based on part of a day, but it's also one of those points as part of a
Lucky I haven't flashed up today.
It's an important part of a day for the fish as well, that little blip and flow. So moving on to soil moisture now.
Just before you move off your low flows, can I ask, have you got a similar profile for algae build-up during those close to low flow positions, and is that impacting on your low flow measurement?
Algae build-up, potentially, we see a bit more of that in the Tuki, not as much in the Ngātaroro, and we're going back, gauging quite often to readjust those ratings. But that's part of the part of the ongoing high maintenance of these sites is when they're shifting around, when the river dries away from where we have our water level monitoring, and if there's algae starts growing on the, the downstream control of water level, we need to be remeasuring often enough to keep those rates.
So you're factoring that into your low flow measurement.
Can I just rephrase the question? I thought what Neil was asking is, do we measure periphyton levels in the water, and if we do, how do they track?
So we do, but it's not continuous monitoring, so we can't track it alongside this. But I think what Thomas is saying is that the algae has been factored into the flow ratings that have been done quite recently.
Can you just quickly flick back to both the Tuki or Nororo, those, Chris? And so we've got, we had the big dry and the droughts 07, 08-ish, etc. Do you have just a running average in there somewhere? Because in your next slide you're about to talk to, you have a percentile in there and you have a medium. But, we all know it's very dry, but is it super dry versus all Februaries, or is it just, where are we given the running averages? Mother Nature's thrown us
in the lower quartile.
They're in it.
Off the top of my head, in terms of where flows are at the moment compared to 25% of average flow February, March is about 4,000 or 5,000 metres a second.
Right.
Hovering around 2,000 litres a second at the moment.
And sorry to interrupt your flow, but or maybe Chair, can we just have that little reference point? Because when I'm talking about those, so it's always low in February, and I can remember it going almost dry. So okay, may not have, but the numbers you just quoted there, you'd normally expect about 4,000 or 5,000. Currently under, what do you say, 2. People understand that, go, okay, it's extra dry right now, and it's for whatever reason it's extra dry, and we've got to do stuff.
Yep.
Thanks.
Yeah, and we put that in the regular updates. But for a lot of these, we have to wait till the end of the month till we've got a monthly average, and so we give these time series as a up to the minute sort of updates.
Yeah, I understand, but many people that talk to me don't actually go to your regular updates, but they understand 1 or 2 sentences just as you described it.
Yeah, and we've got the January update
Thanks.
here, and next week we'll have an update for February. I'll give you a picture of those average. What you see against the average. Soil moisture, so plotting soil moisture over time again. Black line again is this year. The envelopes are not showing up well there, are they? There's actually a shaded area which is between the 10th and 90th. It's not at the bottom of if you squint, you'll be able to see it. So again, trying to get a picture of what's typical for these rivers, as well as tracking the 2013 soil moisture for this site. This is Bridge Par, so things have kind of bottomed out. Soil's dry, you get down to a minimum capacity. So you certainly won't be seeing grass growing these sorts of moisture levels.
Not necessarily dying either. Haven't reached that permanent wilting point yet. I think. Must be close.
I'm not sure. Yeah, I mean, there's grass, even when it's brown, it can survive in terms of the roots are still sitting there and the stems are still sitting there waiting for rain to grow. The point at which that stock dies, I don't know at what point that happens with the growers.
I've never seen it happen.
Not completely right.
Yeah.
Not here.
Not here.
You've got to go to Aussie to see it.
We're talking about 7-year droughts, not our 3 months, 4 months ones.
But it is dry.
Same plot again, this one's for Ongonga on the Rotanafa Plains. So I've had a few more blips there, but generally tracking quite low at the moment.
Lower than the big drought.
Yeah. Yep.
I think the key with the big drought was the prolonged nature of it as well.
Yeah, it didn't rain from August.
Yeah, and that's the key is not so much where we are now, but where are we going? What
Those incredible hot days and windy days just knocked us quickly.
Yeah.
You know, it was nowhere near, the big drought just didn't rain, but it wasn't as hot. You know, those plus 30 days, we're just not used to that. Continuous.
Hot, and then we had the hot and windy days.
In the windy days, yeah.
Sucks the moisture.
Crown Thorpe, near Moraikakaho, so again, we've kind of bottomed out here in terms of soil moisture.
Starts raining.
Well, that's the danger.
That's the danger.
December dry, huh?
That is the danger.
Hangara, so this is up north of Wairau, northern part of the catchment. We're not seeing a bottoming out here. It's more of a normal summer pattern. It certainly got down low more recently, but we haven't had that prolonged dry spell up there. A bit of recovery from last weekend's rainfall. Okay, so groundwater levels now. So this is looking at data from individual wells, monitoring wells, and the water levels in those wells, how do they compare to previous years? So if it's the lowest ever, yellow if it's below normal. And the numbers that Simon Harper's put in here is the rank. 1 if it's the lowest, 3 if it's the third lowest for February.
How long
third lowest for February's going back through time.
How long have we been monitoring those sorts of sites for, Thomas? Do you know?
Ranges from typically 20 years, some a bit longer, some a bit shorter.
So presumably where it's the lowest or close to the lowest, that will be both a climate driver but also potentially an increase in abstraction of groundwater during that period as well might have contributed to us being in an unprecedented territory.
Contributor, yep.
Just when you say these numbers out, I just kind of get where they are. Can you just go to where you've got the red dots, which are lowest ever?
Right.
Can you just tell us approximately where they are?
So here's, you know where I mean, Roy's Hill.
Yep.
The limit. Fern Hill's just here.
Yep.
Yeah, Napier, Hastings. So this is the Gimlet Gravels up here.
Yep.
Yep. And Pucky, Ridge Park.
So would it be fair to say that, it's my understanding of the aquifer, it flows from left to right? So what we're seeing at the lowest ever at Roy's Hill around there, normally that will carry on, so the expect if this continues, that the ones which are yellow will then turn red as the water levels flow out. Given the water flows generally from left to right out to sea, doesn't it?
Question.
But the land also, of course, is a lot higher by Roy's Hill than it is at sea. So you've got water flowing, but you also got the level of the land.
And pressure.
And that's why you often find, nearer the coast, where you actually got that sort of area that's white, there's a lot of confined zones, and all that water is artesian. And most of those wells are still artesian right now.
But that artesian means it's coming out of the aquifer, doesn't it?
That's right, because it's below a certain point where it actually enters.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, given that the water, generally when you get the schematic in your head, about the water enters in the system and then flows through there, and water flows downhill. So if you've got the ones at the top, lowest ever, would you not expect that to then trickle, the flow, as the water, low flow flows through the system for those yellow ones to turn red over time?
Yeah, potentially.
As it empties out from the bottom.
Yeah, there's also there's a bit more of a lag, so if it was, it'd take a while for a dry period to propagate through the aquifer, fairly quickly through Heratonga, faster than through Tāngata, where it would take a bit longer to propagate.
Okay, thank you.
Too clear, does it? Looks a lot clearer on that screen. Anyway, so this is equivalent map, but for Tukituki Ruataniwha. So here's Waipawa, Waipukaro, Onga Onga. The ranges are up here. Just losing that in the overhead. Does that give you bearings of it? So most of these wells are across the Ruataniwha plains that we're looking at here.
So again, could you just tell us where approximately the red dots are?
We've got some near Onga Onga. This one is closer to, where you're just leaving the plains and heading into the hills between there and Waipukurau. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, and the other one to your bottom left?
Yeah, land up there. So we've got Takapau right here.
Sure.
The ranges here.
All right.
Oh, that's where it turns around the corner, but right.
This will be, I'm guessing, that State Highway 2.
Okay. So just off for the Mariahs.
When you look back at the rainfall for Ruahines, going to assume that that's what we rely on to feed not only the rivers but these aquifer levels.
Exactly.
Like it's really struggling up there for rainfall. Probably like I don't know historically. Do you know how that compares to rainfall in that area? But just and long term or short term, if it doesn't rectify itself, is that going to be a concern to the groundwater system here?
Yeah, that's really what we need is rainfall in the ranges to top up the rivers, and the rivers will then top up the groundwater. Until that happens, we really just any rain would just be, it's going to help farmers and growers, but it's not going to bring up the aquifer in the river unless we get a decent dose of rain in the ranges. So that's what we're keeping an eye on, hoping for.
Yeah, so do you know how that compares historically, this year's rainfall records just for that?
I know it's about 10% of average, but I don't know in terms of ranking, where that would sit.
We can look at that if you like.
Yeah.
Okay, Thomas, how much more have you got of this?
I can stop whenever you like.
It's a high level of interest, but we have got an agenda to get through. That's
Yeah.
my one.
Rattle through this and then the sea level pressure map.
Yep. So this is a national drought index to try and give you an overall picture. But again, those ranges, that's where you're seeing more pronounced dry conditions, relatively speaking. This is relative to previous years only. And I'll skip through that. And that when we get to so kind of what's driving the system here. So these big high pressure systems that you see the rainfall coming through and it just kind of gets deflected away from New Zealand. So really we're looking for these big high pressures to break up so that the rainfall can start coming through.
Is there a sign?
What we're wanting to see is whether the likes of that front down below the south line
that looks a
comes
goodie.
up and displaces them. So we'll have a much better idea, I think, next Tuesday of the outlook.
Just move the H up the map. Or something like that.
Yeah.
How would you weather people do?
I can't speak for the weather people.
I won't go into the outlook.
So I guess that's the key message. It's very dry. It depends how long it's going to be prolonged for. And next week, when we report to the National Coordination Centre, we're going to be assessing the status of these blocking anticyclones.
Well, that's very good. Can you do a brief? I think we do a brief report to councillors. They'll be really interested because if we don't get rain in the autumn, we're going to have trouble with our sheep and beef. Absolutely, because it will rain in the winter, but we need rain in the autumn. So that's why there's a high level of interest here. Everyone's interested to see whether that's going to happen.
A brief report next week?
Yeah, just an email to councillors saying this is what we think might happen here.
Jeff, I'll send on the one that we're doing for National Coordination.
Just to Kathleen
a
involved
quick
there, she's
follow-up.
the expert in terms of the outlook and forecasting.
Quick follow-up request. Putting your freshwater scientist hat on in terms of minimum flows and the effect on ecology, are you in a position to advise the effects of current minimum flows, the trend that the worst, the trend we've got with minimum flows and the effects and impacts, permanent impacts on ecology. Are you in a position to, because we've got a paper later on talking about mitigation thereof.
Oh, yes.
Are there environmental considerations and above the economic ones?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of long term, often these systems can bounce back from severe disturbance, whether it's extreme high flows or extreme low flows. In terms of the major rivers, temperature's a big one, and we're kind of past the hottest time of year, so probably the worst effects on fish and Tukituki, Ngātaroa, those big braided rivers, we should be past the worst of that temperature effect. Of course, it had an effect that would have knocked out some, especially the more sensitive species, trout, things like that. The ones that couldn't find somewhere to hide, couldn't find a little spring or cool area to hide until the flow returns. In terms of the lowland streams, yeah, we have Paratua stream that runs dry. In Bridgepa we have Remuneration, Awanui, Karamu. These are all streams where the oxygen drops really low when the flow's low like it is now, and particularly Remuneration, the oxygen gets very low in there, and certainly to the point where you can lose the fish, the fish kill in those streams at these times. If we don't see some sort of recovery, they would then, till we get the next whitebait migrating and things like that, then try and restock those rivers. They become a bit of a sink of the populations.
Jeff, one more, two more. We're running out of time, guys. I'm going to get seriously abused because we're going to be here all night.
I'll be quick. There is one stream that actually is a highlight in all of this. So that's the Raupri. We actually, the band is at 300. We're running now at the moment at 420. We're not pumping, we're actually flowing 14-degree water into there with very high oxygen in it. And it's never looked so good. And we're in real dry. And that's because of we actually using irrigation water that otherwise would have gone to irrigation water. It's actually now augmenting, and we've actually got a lovely stream going. So there is ways and means, if we need to go forward and we get these kind of incidences, to actually solve this.
Thank you, Jeff. That's a seriously good example. Whenua, and then Rick will finish us off.
Yeah, kia ora, thanks Thomas, and welcome to the Regional Council. And thanks to Jeff as well. So with all this data that we're collecting, it's so valuable. I hope that we're using it really well with our other teams, and that you're strongly interconnected to form other teams of what you've collected, because I can see it very useful in your own science speak, but then it being translated to be usable in our other teams. So I just encourage that you keep those links open.
Anyway, Rick will finish.
There's nothing we can do about this, but my underlying concern is that we've seen long droughts in Australia, followed by rain, which has flooded the place, and we've seen massive heavy rainfalls, and Milford Sound even washed away a road from down there. My worry is that we've had this dry piece, we're going to get a wall of water in one hit, and it will be more than we need. That's my worry. Nothing we can do about it, but just
bad for the soil, bad for the fish.
Yeah, that's right.
Everybody wants that.
Thanks, Thomas. You could see that there was a great deal of interest, and Jeff, thank you very much. Yeah, that was great. Great report. Okay, councillors, we need to move on though. We got into decision items. We haven't actually got there yet. Item 7, triennial agreements. It speaks for itself, but James, do you want to lead into this, just briefly?
So this has been before council previously in workshop session. One of the challenges with this triennial agreement, which is required by statute, is how to have a 5-way conversation, bring all the input from the various different councils together and get everybody to agree simultaneously. And so we have worked closely with the mayors in the region and the chair of the regional council to update this document. The feedback you last provided was inputted into this. We had expected there would be one more round of input before other councils would adopt, but some of them have jumped the gun effectively, and rather than providing further feedback, have now adopted, and we're now more or less out of time. So we are presenting this to you today for adoption, and our ability to make changes at this point is problematic because each of those changes would have to go back to each of those other councils, and they would have to undo the adoptions that they've already done. So this is coming to...
That was the case last time.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm happy to move with adopt.
Okay, we're going to move it in a second. Yes, you
I have a question.
You have a question?
Just a question at 7.2 in the paper itself, page 22. Do the councils, our fellow councils, know what including bilateral meetings means?
Yes, I believe so. So we have raised with them the nature of the issues that you, Councillor, in particular, have raised, and so they understand that there is a desire to have those bilateral meetings, and that has informed the paper which has come into the Corporate Strategic Committee.
Okay, if there's no more questions, we have a mover and a seconder. Rick, do you wish to speak? Martin, do you wish to speak?
Very quickly, just to reflect that the issues we discussed with Central Hawke's Bay and with Napier and the funding issues, resourcing issues to resolve these wastewater concerns, this seems to me to be the home for it. Water is a priority, Three Waters is an express priority, joint development approaches to annual and long-term plans is right in there along with bilateral, so let's use it.
Thanks, Martin. Any other speakers? Otherwise, all those in favour of the three recommendations? Aye or against? It's carried. Okay, we're on to item 8, the Tāngata Whenua Remuneration Review. Do you need to speak to that, James?
I think the paper is self-explanatory. I don't think there's anything additional we need to raise. The issue's been around for a long time, so...
Okay.
A move.
Just want to move? No questions on the paper? Mover and seconder. Anyone, you choose to speak?
Yeah, I think we've had a long discussion over this, and it's fallen on our lap to make this decision, which the Tāngata Whenua reps have asked us to. And with the review and evaluation that was done by an outside company, I think we're all happy with the fair suggested and recommended amount. And that's why I want to move it, and I think it's fair that we vote that way.
Thank you. Anyway, Sheriff, any other speakers? Yes, I just want to add to that. This has been a long journey, and it's always difficult to set these things. But I agree with Anyway. I think councillors have looked on this in the fairest way they can, and I just hope that this is satisfactory and does the job that it's intended to do. So all those in favour?
Aye.
Aye. All against? It is carried. So we're now on to Martin, your notice of motion, item 9. Looking through, and I would ask that you speak to that, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The motion is threefold as set out in the notice. I substantially rely on the background to that in endorsing those motions. I wish to just make the following further comments. Firstly, dealing with the elephant in the room, I want to be very clear that this is an option B evaluation. It is not about what was Plan A, and I'll say no more about that. Second, there's been a lot of talk in the community of late about the proposed name change and the obvious concern that we should be focusing on and getting on with our job. I think this notice of motion signals that we intend to do exactly that, and very much are. We are getting on with our flood protection scheme. We are getting on with setting water regulation. We are getting on as best we can with reforestation of our eroding slopes. We need to get on with water security, and the evidence for that has just been placed in front of us from the current summer we're in. I honestly feel that this issue is literally screaming for our attention. The farmers of Central Hawke's Bay are hurting, and not just financially. Jeremy spoke before about us being a council with some heart. I can assure everyone that this notice of motion comes from the heart. You're all aware of the background, the problem definition statement in the paper. It really is encapsulated in the first bullet point that the Central Hawke's Bay economy is critically reliant on secure access to water. But that very demand places acute and chronic pressures on the aquifer and in turn on the surface water flows and of course therefore the ecology. We have to get out of that impasse. We need to move beyond it. We have the regulatory consequences associated with Change 6. We now need to look at, I believe, mitigation. I believe that there is a case for giving priority attention to this in a very focused way. It's not about diverting resources from other work streams. Those resources are there. We have an adopted council policy dealing with how we are supposed to utilise the $5 million funding for water security purposes. We have provincial growth funding allocated or directed towards these projects, but there is a risk of that funding being applied elsewhere if we don't move. So the council staff have been working on this as best they can, and I believe political support is now required to give impetus and to gain momentum. This will have implications for the long-term plan setting next year. Any project of viable scale is going to need more than the $5 million we've got to look at that project and then establish it, and may need more than is earmarked in terms of the provincial growth funding. So I'd be keen for some advice from staff about the proposed deadline of 30 November that is reflected in the third element of the notice of motion, because if we need to fund one of the options arrived at what point do we need to confirm that quantum to move into that long-term consultation phase? A key element will be stakeholder engagement, and this is my final point. The evaluation of options through the Tukituki Leaders Group will be key to that. The policy around application of long-term funding is clear that we need to continue to engage with the relevant stakeholders as we work through these options, but we simply need to get on with it, and I commend the motion accordingly.
And before we go for a mover, which I presume will be Martin, are there any questions for the mover of this notice of motion?
I just have a question through the chair to James around, you know, what Martin's outlined in this paper, which is fantastic, has given us a good background, but in terms of on our staffing resource and where this goes with the long-term plan, how this, your view around this proposal, this motion, and how that affects our staff and resources.
So we do have dedicated funding for the water security work, which was provided for in the long-term plan. That is not directly tagged to staffing FTEs. It is a pot of money which has been leveraged obviously with the Provincial Growth Fund, and we will be relying predominantly on external contracts for the delivery of this work. Having said that, much of the technical expertise that's required to advance this work doesn't reside within Council directly. So I'm comfortable that we can accommodate this proposal within existing work. But I also would perhaps just make the comment that all of these major projects also require management oversight and scrutiny. So all of the work in this area is continue to put pressure on the management team of the organisation to juggle everything that we're doing.
Any other questions? Oh, yes, a question, Neil?
Well, Mr Chair, rather than a question, I wonder whether, I'm assuming we've got a mover and a seconder.
No, we haven't yet. I'm just asking. We haven't got a mover and a second yet, but I can go to that.
I have a seconder.
No, we don't have a mover. I wanted Martin as the promoter.
Just prior to moving down that road, Mr Chair, I'm interested to know whether we could add to the recommendations on page 67, which there are 1 and 2, whether we could add a third recommendation That being that the water is essentially uplifting Councillor Williams' paragraph 18 in his background, that the water security options evaluation includes consideration of land management practices, water conservation strategies, managing aquifer recharge and stream flow enhancement approaches.
Can we do that after we've got a mover?
I move the motion.
Sorry, just before we move it, Tom is available to give a presentation on the water security program, which this is obviously directly in response to, if councillors wish to hear more about what is envisaged before you vote on the motion.
We're having a discussion, so go for it.
Because that's actually a fair question. So, given that the councils have plans in this regard for quite some time, a lot of work's underway, for example, SkyTem, etc., etc., we've done some work on water. So what would this motion do to disturb the work we've already got underway?
Well, I think the presentation will give you a strong sense of how this does support what we are doing in this space. So you'll be better informed to vote on the notice of motion probably following the presentation. But this information in part has been provided in workshop to council since the election, so you'll have some sense of this, and I guess it's for you to judge whether or not you'd like more information before voting on the motion or not.
The only thing I have is a little bit of concern. If you came here and just read this motion, you'd think that the council have done nothing on this.
Can we just get the procedure right here? At what point are we asking questions about the motion? At what point are we discussing the motion? And at what point am I moving the motion? Because I would have thought I'd move the motion, it's seconded, we have questions and then we have discussion, but I may be wrong.
And that's the process, but something else is introduced, but quite frankly I'd rather go back. Are you moving this motion?
I'm moving the motion.
And we're going to second it. Okay.
Well, just as a matter of point of order.
No, but then are you happy to add in Neil's third point?
Well, I think that should be a subject of discussion. I would commend the information that Tom was able to present to you. It has substantially informed, and I've spent quite a bit of time with Tom, making sure that this motion draws upon and is in harmony with the water security program, the provincial growth funding sequence, and the existing policies of this council. It's about giving impetus and momentum to what we are doing and showing political support for it. It is not something additional, but it is a greater degree of momentum to what is there.
All right. And that's what I would have thought too. Neil, do you want to now put up your amendments to
Well, I was hoping that the mover and seconder, prior to moving and seconding, would incorporate a third tranche into the recommendation prior to moving. But if there's a desire for me to move an amendment later, well, so be it.
I would like to speak to that, so I suggest that be moved as an amendment.
That's the point. Okay. Right, we've already spoken, Martin.
Yes.
Will.
Right, so roughly 6 months ago, I campaigned on this exact issue as the most serious issue I saw facing Central Hawke's Bay. Now, I didn't prophesise the summer that we were due to have, but unfortunately, here we are in an extremely dry summer. The debate is out there whether this is a normal Hawke's Bay summer or not, but what's not up for debate is the water scarcity that many people in Central Hawke's Bay are facing right now. So to just add to Martin's talk to the motion, it's more than just the farmers, but I do have farmers that are facing water shortages for the first time, not irrigating farmers, but just for their stock supply, so springs, creeks and streams that feed their water supplies for drinking water for stock. For the very first time, that water has run out. There are residents, obviously towns under restriction, but residents on their own water supplies that have been secure up until this year have run out for the first time. And I think probably most importantly right now is the state of the environment. So that's our core business, our core focus. The rivers are in trouble, they're sick, the flows are very low. The water's obviously been very hot, and the intense sunlight, and we've got a habitat that is not conducive to wildlife and biodiversity as it should be. So, and then I guess, yeah, so, and to talk to Rick's point about what, you know, it's not like the council hasn't been doing anything, and so I'd like to congratulate Tom and his team on the work that's been done thus far, but the feeling in Central Hawke's Bay is there was a solution on the table. That's there no longer, and nothing has happened since. That's the perception out there, and so I think today, and congratulate Councillor Williams' motion, is that this will go a long way to, I guess, giving the people of Central Hawke's Bay some assurance that the Regional Council has water security back on the agenda, and showing the regional leadership that they're looking for. Thanks.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers?
I'd like to move an amendment, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And so do we have a second for Neil's amendment?
Are we able to put that up?
We can put it on the screen.
Let's put it on the board. Get up there.
Yep, I've got it right here.
Brilliant listening.
So look, Chair, it is somewhat unorthodox to have a staff presentation in relation to a notice of motion. Normally the notice of motion would then precipitate some work being done, and that would be brought back to Council. The idea with having a presentation and Tom available to speak to it was to short-circuit that at this point in time, particularly given, as Councillor Foley has raised, there is a perception in the community that there is not enough being done, or not enough has been done. So we can run through that as much for the wider community's benefit as for councillors as well, if that's of use to you.
But let's get this.
Yep.
I would welcome that, because what I want to know is what are our current plans, and I want to know what impact it is. So what we've had here so far is Councillor Williams saying this to speed up, but I sense with Councillor Curtin's view, he's interested to make some changes to what we're doing. And I want to know what effect that's going to have.
So there's the amendment, and we have a seconder, anyway, and do our mover and seconder the original substandard motion accept that?
Are we discussing the amendment?
Yeah.
Before we vote on the amendment or whatever the procedure is, I just wanted to note that the broader issue of water conservation is being assessed as part of the regional water assessment at regional level, and it could take some time. The funding in the long-term plan is a ready reaction fund. In other words, we know, Blind Freddie would know, that we're facing a water security issue here, and what we are talking about isn't something that would cut off water conservation, land management practice, discussion or evaluation. I would also say that I have firmly in mind that in looking at our needs to address water security as it stands, any part of that should factor in the need for appropriate and the most efficient cropping regimes, land management practices and what have you. What I don't want to see is us in a holding pattern for 2 years doing a benefits assessment or a need assessment while we work out what some sort of transition to a different cropping or pasture management regime is before we get into application of the Ready Reaction Fund, the Provincial Growth Fund, to get some runs on the board for water security. I see them operating in parallel. This is part of a journey that is going to take decades to resolve across the region. That's my only concern with it. Yes, it's unarguable that should be factored in. I don't want to see it meaning we don't get something back for consideration as part of the next long-term plan cycle.
Well, Mr. Chair, could I speak to...
Yeah, no, you definitely can.
Well, Mr. Chair, in proposing this amendment, I'm hoping to capture, along with the, to make it explicit that the recommendation itself about giving priority and urgency to Plan B options evaluation does include these elements. And there's a very important reason to do that. I'm certain that in doing the evaluation, these issues ought to be included in any event, but for clarity, they need to be specified in a move in this direction. So what we're doing is ensuring that we are at least accelerating, or at least putting a time-bound constraint on the options evaluation, but it's also important to recognise that water security on its own is not the total sum of the evaluation. Water security, in the sense of providing economic security, is one thing, but we also need to ensure that we've got a range of strategies in play to achieve the goal. It's simply not about adding more water to the equation when we don't have parallel processes around land management, around water conservation strategies, around managing recharge, etc. So I'm wanting this direction of travel to incorporate those things. That's why I think it's important to make it explicit.
Thank you. Neil, anyone would like to speak?
In agreement with Neil.
You're in agreement.
So, Chair, can I just make some comment in relation to that? So, we have a focused piece of work under the water security banner, which is the work which has been funded by PGF and which Tom was going to present upon.
Still might.
And still might. These issues are also part of the council's overall work around water use, and I would just and look, they can be brought together into a consolidated picture, and there's no problem with that. There is a degree of complexity to this in relation to what the council's levers are, because part of this is regulatory. So it's policy and regulatory, and the reason I say that is that we have already got staff who work with the irrigation community around irrigation efficiency, and so we have staff out in the field ensuring that irrigators are using the best possible practices, etc. That is a non-regulatory and it's a voluntary exercise, and we work with the willing on that. Some of what is contemplated, I think, here in terms of driving greater uses on efficiency and water conservation does require use of our regulatory levers. In the tank plan change, for example, the proposal is to take everybody's existing allocation off them and reallocate back to them on an efficiency test basis. So people will have to demonstrate they are using best practice. Now, that is an example of how we are proposing to drive that. In the case of Tukituki, that doesn't exist in the current Tukituki plan. So people have an allocation of water. The evidence suggests that in dry times they are using the maximum available water that they are legally entitled to. And so our ability to necessarily require efficiency or conservation is difficult in that catchment, and it does depend on how we use our regulatory levers. So I just want to ensure that Council's clear in including this alongside as part of our scope where that sits in our wider program of work. It doesn't necessarily sit directly in the pieces of work which are being explored and were contemplated in the initial notice of motion. It does broaden it out, and it does bring in a whole bunch of our wider policy and planning work and non-regulatory work.
It just says consideration of though.
Yes, and so we can bring that picture together for you.
Mr. Chair, I assume we're in debate, but it's appropriate for the Chief Executive to comment.
You're having a debate over there, we're not.
Well, I'm not leading the charge here.
You are actually leading the charge.
Well, in response, Mr. Chair, I would say that this is an evaluation of options. It is not a fully fledged once over of all of that. It's saying what are the options. So I'm wondering what the excess demand would be to include it.
No, well, certainly a high-level articulation of what are those options, easy to do. It's more being clear about what is the expectation, because driving land management practice and water use efficiency in practice on the ground involves a complex mix of regulatory and non-regulatory measures, which I'm sure you'd appreciate. And so the extent to which you're expecting either work or detailed plans around that is the question.
And options.
Yeah, Craig.
So, I mean, I'd support Councillor Curtin's amendment there with the assumption or proviso that it doesn't actually delay the urgency of what we're all on board about, I think. And also, it's of concern to Councillor Curtin, key issues that the council has grappled with historically. And actually, it's the consideration of. There's nothing mandatory there, and actually everyone's just looking for that confidence that actually this is happening somewhere. Mm-hmm. We have all the history, so I support that amendment, and I'm still looking forward, if possible, to get officials' presentation.
I second that. Look forward to.
Can we go back to, look, all those in favour of this, of the amendment? Aye. You want more questions?
Well, I haven't had a chance to ask a question yet, and I thought we were going to have the presentation from Tom.
No, I don't think so. We don't. We can have the presentation after we've done this. Why do you need the presentation?
All right.
Well, Mr. Chairman, can I suggest we're actually on the same page here. If there's no delay to the time frame, I don't think anyone here is disagreeing that these issues should be factored in. I do think that it may actually, with respect, help everyone through the vote on the amended motion. If we did hear from Tom, that's my view on it. But if we haven't got time to do that,
we have got time.
I'm just happy to speak. I've got a couple of things. Cautionary tale. That's right. I'll forget that. You do that.
No, you do the speaking.
I just want to say to you, look,
speaking to the amendment.
Speaking to the amendment.
Amendment? Yeah, can I say, I'm going to support the amendment, but mainly because I don't think it disturbs what we're currently going to do. We're going to do all of these things. We put money into land management practices by way of a future farming trust. So we're restating what we're trying to do anyway. So I don't get that. Water conservation, yes, we do that. We've got work underway with managed equity. I agree with this. We're doing this sort of stuff anyway. The only reservation I have is it tends to imply what you've written there is we're not doing it, which is what I don't agree with. So I was trying to say is if you read the minutes, they just come to this idea about managing, conserving water. Well, we've been thinking that for a long time and doing a lot of work. So that's my point.
Thank you. No.
No right of reply?
Well, first of all, is there anyone else wish to speak, and then you've got a right of reply. But anyone else wish to speak? Okay, Neil, we're going to put it. So you're the last speaker.
Okay, put it.
Put it. Okay, we have an amendment. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye. Against? The amendment is carried. So we're back to the substantive notice of motion with the additions. Anyone? Martin, do you wish to have a final speech on it, or if we just put it here from the...
I think we were going to, if we could hear from Tom before we vote.
No, we're going to hear from Tom after.
Okay, we'll hear from Tom after. No, the main point to me was that it is time bound. That's the difference. There's a time bound here that ends with a feed into the long-term plan. The amendment, which embraces utterly sensible considerations, doesn't mean we're going to frustrate that. I'm all for it.
Okay. Yes.
I'm going to vote in support of your resolution, but I do want to make a couple of notes here. The issue of water security in Central Hawke's Bay has been known for a long time. Ross Bramwell spoke to me about this 20 years ago when they issued a round of resource consents for substantial irrigation. He said the Tukituki cannot withstand this. We've known this. And our first port of call was to put a big wall of concrete up over one of the tributaries. And a lot of hassle and angst into that, it's gone. We've then had a campaign run of sorts to try and keep the levels of the Tukituki River down low. We had all sorts of things to try and get a workaround of this. I hope that your resolution and the discussions going on in Central Hawke's Bay means that we've turned a page on all of that and we're going to be focusing very clearly on the future and what options we've got here in a constructive way, rather than harking back to things which haven't worked and other old remedies, because that's what we need.
Thank you, Rick.
Mr. Chair, just before you put it, don't need to change anything, but I'd just like to flag my interest in working with Councillors Foley, Williams and yourself as part of that group.
Thank you, Craig. Okay, I'm putting it. Notice of motion with the amendments. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried unanimously. So thank you, councillors. Now, Tom, can you tell us what we're already doing?
I can try.
This is to help us inform our decision-making process.
No, this is for the public, because most of us know what we're already doing. This is for everyone to just absolutely know. We've got a notice of motion now, which we've all accepted. Now, Tom's going to tell us what we're all doing. You can do it in 20 minutes, Tom.
I'll do it in way less than 20 minutes. I just really put the slide up just as foreshadowing that this program of work is coming to the Corporate and Strategic Committee on the 11th of March, and so you'll have a much broader and deeper briefing and a paper associated with that, and my anticipation is that there'll be some decision points that we'll be asking from you to sort of progress aspects of that. But it just, we know through our plan changes, the economic impacts of a lack of security around water, and particularly in the tank plan change, some analysis was done, not specifically related to this program of work, but made some assessments on, what's the potential cost, GDP cost of less secure water, less reliable water, and it's fair to say, and Jerry, if you remember this, it runs into, potentially runs into the hundreds of millions of dollars per annum. So it's a very significant matter. I can probably, if you want, I can probably just present this slide and stop. At each step I can go deeper into it. But effectively, the water security program, as the Chief Executive said, it is a subset of a very broad program of work in relation to fresh water from this organisation, and it also clearly intersects with activities on the land. So it's but for the purposes of advancing some work streams, we are guided by both the policy and the Provincial Growth Fund in terms of the Provincial Growth Funding Agreement. We've landed on 4 projects that we are incorporating within the security program. And what I'm showing there, I'm not sure how well you can see it, is just a sense of the sources of funds that we're committing to this project. So on the left, clearly this is a science project that we pulled into this for the purposes of securing provincial growth funding support, so we were successful, so I don't want to claim the credit for a very great science program around the 3D aquifer mapping that you've seen the helicopter charging. So regional council's funding of that sits within long-term plan ICM budgets, not the water security program. So then we move into 3 projects that were effectively enabled through council's adoption of the freshwater security policy early 2019, I believe. So the first step of that is initiating what is called a regional water assessment, which is really just asking ourselves quite a simple question in terms of what is the supply-demand balance of fresh water in the region, and what does that look like over time? And it may seem kind of a very silly and obvious question, but it's about creating a tool that can be used to test various scenarios, to test water conservation scenarios, to test climate change scenarios, and so it employs a natural capital framework. So look, we're really excited about that project. The Provincial Growth Fund is supporting it. We've actually already had some interest from other regions to see, to watch how it goes. Engagement has happened with the territorial authorities. They have all committed staff to participate in building the data for that. So that will happen in 2 phases. There will be a data build, and then there'll be a model build. And we really hope that will be a fantastic tool for you as decision makers over the long term to think about what are the big priorities, big investment or policy priorities that are required for the long-term water security for the region. And we're just in discussions with Petty is sitting at the early stages of that. Petty is sitting on the steering group, and
and when we sort of move out of the data phase, or probably even prior to that, we'll look forward to getting deeper iwi engagement in that program. But it just sits as a little bit of a data gathering exercise out of local authorities in the first instance. Then the next two projects, which I can discuss in deeper detail if you want, are effectively where the main emphasis is, and it's looking at water security in the Tukituki catchment, and also considering options for environmental flow maintenance in the Heretaunga catchment. In many regards, the Heretaunga piece is an extension of some of the directions and findings of the tank plan change, and you'll actually find you'll find the origins of this actually sitting in the current tank policy, but it doesn't necessarily need to wait for tank to become operative for us to pursue an option like this. In terms of Tukituki, it is very much as Councillor Williams has suggested. It is what are the options that we have down there to address the water security needs, and so we can I can take you for a deeper dive into that, and that just gives you a sense of some of the funding that is been applied to that. In terms of timeframes, we're going as fast as we can. There have been challenges in terms of just finalising the details with the Provincial Growth Fund, and there have been, and as James has referred to, just sheer capacity issues to get going. But I have presented 2 workshops at Central Hawke's Bay District Council, and I have sought the leave of the Tukituki Leaders Forum for them to operate as a stakeholder group, that can, not a decision-making group, but as a stakeholder reference group to test options, local options, and advance that program of work. So I don't propose to go through the 3D aquifer mapping project. I think you're all very familiar with that. The regional water assessment I've touched on briefly. I just want to talk in terms of the relation to water security and the Tukituki and Heretaunga pieces. I just kind of want to speak briefly to the ideology of what we're proposing. I accept, and look, this perhaps is a discussion for the 11th at Corporate and Strategic, but look, I'm totally open to the fact that you may charge us with lacking ambition in respect of the program, and we'll take that on board. But as a first stop, as a first principles approach, we are looking at how can we look at options that first and foremost provide secure environmental flows to offset the impacts of our water use. So that's kind of the first, that's the one objective we must achieve. You may direct us to be a bit broader and look for new water or solve some different problems, but the proposal as it stands is very much to mitigate the effects of the environment, and on the basis that the cost of doing that is borne by water users, all you water users across the region, how specifically that will have to be borne through, and that is the price we pay for secure, for retaining access to the security of water that we have now. I can, if you want, I can go deeper into both projects, but they are at their formative stages, and I think as we're thinking about, I'm just thinking about your dates, Councillor, in terms of November. I certainly hope that if we look at this slide and we talk about, we get into terminology of scoping and pre-feasibility and feasibility can get quite technical, and I think the questions along the bottom of that slide kind of neatly encapsulate the process that we're going through, which is effectively, in terms of a problem, what could it be, and then pre-feasibility is trying to discover what should it be, and then full feasibility is what will it be. And the funding that we have from the Provincial Growth Fund and our own funding, I believe, provides us with the resources to step through those processes, but we have to step through those processes. And so in terms of November, I certainly hope that that we have in a position to be bringing to you options for further analysis, options for further study, and on knowing that we've got the resources to do that. So effectively just a mirror process for Hiratanga. So I don't know whether you want me to add any more than that. There will be, it's been, it feels like it's taken too long to get to this point, but I'm confident that we've got good resourcing and good support to try and deliver in a way that sort of matches the urgency.
Thank you, Tom. We've got time for some questions, Rick.
Trying to not jump to the what will it be, but we had this council had a wonderful presentation about aquifer recharge, and I think it opened our eyes quite a lot. And I just wondering, could we, in the light of a huge change in the council, big council around this table, have that presentation brought back to us again?
We have organised to have it for this council and Central Hawke's Bay Council.
We have?
And
the planning.
And we've asked the Tuki Leaders Forum if they're happy to receive that presentation as well.
Excellent.
We need to get some dates for that, Tom.
24th, 25th, 26th March.
Of
March.
Excellent.
Neil.
Tom, I wonder if we can go back to your very first slide where you presented the different approaches. Yeah, that one. Yeah, I just make a comment, given knowledge of how they've progressed, is that in many respects, the respective streams of work are somewhat ad hoc and have been driven by different drivers on the way through, including the potential government subsidy that's accompanied them. So what I'm be interested to do is to pursue the next level up to say, why are we doing this? So we're clear on what our drivers are, economy and environment, etc., along with our overall plan, that we do include the other work streams that we're active in. I'd hate to anyone get a sense that we are, that this is some total of what we're doing. So for example, future farming, our water conservation efforts, all of those other lines of work which go to meet sit under the water security banner. I wonder whether your next iteration of that can incorporate that bigger picture.
Yeah, so are you happy if I kick that to the 11th and present that on the 11th?
Any other questions for Tom? So thank you, Tom. And
just one, sorry, just thinking. As part of the, given the state of the Tukituki River and the purified at its low levels and so on, the general concern about the quality of the river is part of some other work we did previously. One of the options we're looking at was a very low level construction to harvest water to let it go down just for environmental issues. Do we have any work thoughts, backs of envelopes, work being done on that? Or is that just simply gone off the table?
No, not at all. And so we are revisiting some of the earlier reports, and I actually had a meeting with the authors of those reports last week. And as a part of building, the scoping and options analysis, absolutely going back to some of that earlier work, and effectively, asking them to solve for slightly different problems.
Yep. Oh, that's very good. I'm very pleased with that. Thank you.
any other questions? Will?
Yeah, I'll just really sum up the feeling and what I've heard here today. Like, there's been quite a few jumps towards potential solutions and that, and I'd like to hear from Tom just that at this stage, probably still early stage, whether you agree we just need to keep the scope open and wide and perhaps not draw too many conclusions yet what the solutions might look like, and definitely need to be all-encompassing, so more water in the rivers, more water for townships and residents, but yeah, equally land management practices and the like. But I just think, yeah, let's not draw down too much to definite solutions at this stage, if you agree.
Yes, and so it'll be interesting and especially down in Tukituki, we're looking to utilise an external facilitator that can actually is quite experienced in building sort of across matrix of options, because it is complex. Look, it is we've mentioned managed aquifer recharge, and some people have suggested that we've kind of got that in mind as a single solution. The issue with that tool is that we need to understand if it's on the table or off the table, because if it's on the table, and then that will inform. And when I say on the table, like can it be done? Will it work? And so we've had some very high level in our work that says it's worth looking at. We actually have to initiate a pilot to actually discover to the extent to which it is a tool in the toolbox, and then we need to decide is it a tool that we want to use. So, but until such time as we've done pilot work, we don't know.
Okay.
Sorry,
Jeff,
can I just make one other comment? Is that when I discussed this with CHB DC district councillors, they had a sort of a concern that this was a single pot of money, and that there was a risk that one catchment might get more than the other. Both Tuki and Hiratonga sit, particularly with the PGF, under separate funding agreements, so they are separate projects. But I think there's merit in considering it, and this is something that we'll discuss on the 11th, of considering packaging those two projects together at a governance level, but that's a discussion for another day.
Jeff,
yeah, just somehow in relation to Councillor Foley's, in the Hiratonga project, which is tank, I would almost want to talk, the opposite is actually the solutions we have there as a wide range, keep them open, that we don't diminish them. I see there a rather large number sitting there for the Hiratonga flow maintenance scheme. I believe that actually we have a network and we have a system in place that we possibly can actually reduce that sort of funding, and we can look at other options as well. So, once again, congratulate you guys on actually getting that all across the line.
So that's just development. That's just development funding. That's not building anything.
Yeah,
and the
I understand.
And the Provincial Growth Fund have made conditional commitments, further support to if and when something's built.
It doesn't always have to cost a lot of money.
Okay, thank you, Tom. I think the point that Will was making really is one that I totally agree with, that we come from, put the past behind us, and we go into this with open eyes. And I think that when people, there will be no grand solution, probably, but there will be a mixture of a whole lot of different solutions, just the same as in Hiratonga. That always seems to be the way. So thanks, Tom. Appreciate all the work you're doing on this. Sorry you had to wait to get your report, but I just felt I need to get the other thing out of the way.
We're off.
And then we'll now break for lunch. Thank you.